Well, hello once again. I'm Pastor Jeremy Combs, coming to you here from the Lifeford Bible Baptist Church. Hope you had a great Easter weekend. We had some great services here at our church, and now we're in the home stretch of April. Can you believe that? A fourth of the year will be gone, and we're smack dab in the middle of the book of 2 Samuel. In fact, we're on over halfway done with the book. We're in 2 Samuel chapter 14, and we're dealing with a horrendous sin that occurred in 13, and that is when Amnon raped his half-sister Tamar. And we find at the end of the chapter that, of course, Absalom fled. We also know that David was angry, but he said nothing. And we leave in verse 39 of chapter 13. It says, "And the soul of King David longed to go forth unto Absalom." So the idea here is very debated, and there's two rules of thought here with where David is at. Is it that he so longed to have his son return that but he didn't know how to do it? A lot of folks believe, and I don't know, I've been challenged on this myself, that that's probably not what it's inferring to, because obviously he's the king, and if he wants Absalom to come back, as you'll see at the end of this next chapter, all he has to do is send a messenger, and boom, he's back in the kingdom. A lot of folks believe what this is that he is in a quandary, that David knows that wrong has been committed. He knows that the sin and the sinner need to be dealt with, not only on the basis of he's the father of Absalom, but also on the basis of he's the king. He's the one who is supposed to bring judgment and justice to the land. And so he's there not knowing what to do. He's so angry and he wants to go to war, but there's something in his heart that says, I don't want to do this. And so he's in this, we say, quandary at the end of the chapter. And David, maybe a little bit wisely, waits, and in the process, he's comforted concerning Amnon, seeing he was dead. The worst thing that you can ever do is when somebody has died, especially when you're a close family member or friend, is make a rash decision. When you're in grief, you're not always thinking the best. And so you want to be careful not to make any financial decisions, not to get rid of anything. And you especially have to understand that you're emotional and that you're probably going to respond a little bit more emotionally than you typically do. And so you almost have to tiptoe or walk on eggshells, not with others per se, but knowing yourself that I may not respond the best. Well, this is where David is at. Finally, the emotions are kind of settling down, and we come to chapter 14, verse 1. Now, Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was toward Absalom. So, again, where you are going to interpret the last verse will then decide where you interpret this verse. And again, I've been challenged. I always thought it was that the king just loved him and wanted to bring him back and didn't know how. And that is a possibility, that he brings him back if he shows favoritism. How can he rule against other people? Maybe as well, though, there's the idea here that David was through with Absalom, that he had tried, and now he knew that Absalom would not be the next king. And Joab perceived. Joab was somebody that when problems occur, there's three different ways of dealing with problems you see in this chapter. For David, it was to exclude, to just get that problem out, to ignore the problem. Maybe you could even say not just to exclude, but to excuse the problem, to act like it's just not even there, to pretend like nothing happened. Well, that's never good with the problem. And I think you will see here in chapter 14, if David had definitively dealt with Absalom, it probably could have cleared up a lot of problems down the road. However, to deal with Absalom, the penalty would have been swift, it would have been severe. I think at best, he needed to leave him banished from the kingdom. Probably, and maybe closer to what should have been done, he had murdered, and it was a willful, thought out, premeditated murder. Really, Absalom should have been put to death. His life should have been forfeited. And I think that is the idea that David knows and therefore puts on the brakes and doesn't know what to do here. So Because of this, Joab, who when problems come, there's those that will exclude or excuse those problems. Then there's those that will exploit those problems. And captain number one exploiter was Joab. Joab was always in it for himself. He always made calculated, cold-hearted moves as far as not what was best for David. Now, there's no doubt about it that he was a great soldier. He was pretty loyal to David until it came to himself. And then when it came to himself, he had no bards and no rules against dropping David and doing what he thought was best. Here is a classic example of this. If Joab really wanted to help David, he would have come along and would have given him proper counsel and support, but instead, Joab is thinking about Joab. David is in his 60s, probably right beginning his 60s, we believe. And David has been through a tumultuous 10 years where he committed adultery. And then after that, he's lost a baby son. He's lost a grown son. You read the Psalms where he talks about not being able to sleep, stomach issue, head issues. Grief can wreak havoc upon somebody. And that's why another rule with grief is when grief begins, you've got to take care of yourself. And I'm about as guilty as anybody else. Sometimes we can feel bad taking a nap. That's not a problem. If you've been through an ordeal with a loved one who has died, it may be the best medicine you can take is rest up. You need to eat. You need to go to the doctor. You need to get back into the process of taking care of yourself. Sometimes when we're dealing, especially with long-term illnesses or grief, we can put off certain things to the detriment of ourselves. Well, we find here that Joab could have really helped David, but he's not going to. He's going to seek to exploit the problem. He's looking at David, and boy, he doesn't look like that rough and rugged warrior. He's losing ground. He's grief-stricken. What's going to happen to me? And now this is Joab's mindset. If David dies. And so Joab begins to put a plan in process. Verse 2, Joab went to Tekoa. This is about 10 miles south of Jerusalem. Amos, the prophet, was from Tekoa. That's the only two people in the Bible we know from this region. He fetched thence a wise woman and said unto her, I pray thee, feign thyself to be a mourner, put on now mourning apparel, and anoint thyself with oil, but thyself with oil, but be as a woman that a long time mourned for the dead. When they mourn, the Jews really mourn. Now, today we're losing this, but we've got a couple of funerals coming up this week, and I'll wear a black suit, a darker suit. It's a sign of mourning. I wouldn't want to go in with an Easter bright shirt and tie. I mean, if that's all you have, that's one thing, but kind of common courtesy is that you wear a darker color, that you're a little more dressy. We're losing that, and that's a shame, because really you're showing respect, I believe, to the family when you show up and you're a little bit more dressed up than normal. You're saying this event is important to you. It's important to me. The Jews took it to the extremes. I mean, they would tear their garments. They'd put ash on their head. They wouldn't shower. They wouldn't bathe. They wouldn't. Anointing with oil would be the idea of just not. They would stink. They would be unwashed, unkept. And so Joab tells this woman at Tekoa, make yourself look like you've been just in grief for a long time, and come to the king and speak on this matter unto him. So Joab put the words in her mouth. He's going to exploit David, not of his own accord. Exploiters do this quite often. They'll get somebody else to do the deed. They'll get somebody else to be the little mouthpiece. And when the woman at Tekoa spake to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and did obeisance. Okay, she treats him like he's the king and said, help, O king. The king said unto her, what aileth thee? And she answered, I am indeed a widow woman, and mine husband is dead. So we're setting the story here. You know, Satan is a deceiver, and when we are not doing what is right, and we allow our flesh or the devil to lead us, we often emulate what the Word of God does. Joab had to be privy to, or maybe had heard David tell this, how that Nathan, remember, came in, gave the parable of the sheep, and really cut to the heart and got David back on track to get right with God. And this is kind of a similar parable or tale that the woman of Tekoa is going to tell. It's very an emotional one. It all plays up on her. It has really nothing to do with facts. It has all to do with feelings, and that's a dangerous thing. She says, "Help, O king." The king said unto her, "What aileth thee?" She said, "I'm a widow woman, mine husband's dead." Verse 5. Verse 6, "And thy handmaiden had 2 sons. They strove together in the field, and there was none to part them, but the one smote the other and slew him." I think of Cain and Abel is what I think of, but no witnesses. One son kills the other. And behold, the whole family is risen up against thine handmaiden. And they said, "Deliver him that smote his brother, that we may kill him for the life of his brother whom thou slew, and we will destroy the heir also. And so they shall quench my coal which is left, and shall not leave to my husband neither name nor remainder upon the earth." Boy, it's really a lot like what David's quandary is. David needs to deal with Absalom, and probably a lot of the family members say, yes, let's deal with Absalom. And Joab is exploiting this problem, not encouraging or helping David. And I think he sees the strength, the charisma of Absalom. He doesn't see anything godly about him, as we see in this chapter. But he thinks, if anybody's taken over for David, it better be Absalom. And so they're boxing David into a corner with this story. The king said unto the woman, "Go to thine house, and I'll give charge concerning thee." And the woman of Tekoa said unto the king, "My lord, O king, the inquiry be on me, and my father's house, and the king's, and his throne be guiltless." He says, "Go home, let me think this through. Let me pray about this." She says, "Well, no, wait, king, I've got to know now. These people are like pounding down my door. And king, if you wait and don't deal with this, you're going to be guilty." Again, boy, anytime you have to deal with a problem that quickly, flares, flags, warning signals ought to go up. Again, Joab is intimidating or exploiting David to say, "Hey, you've got to deal with Absalom. You've got to deal with Absalom. You've got to deal with him now." The king said, "Whosoever saith aught against thee, bring him to me, and he shall not touch thee any more." King David says, "If any of these people bother you, you have them come to me, and I'll tell them that I'm going to make judgment." Then said she, "I pray thee, let the king remember the Lord thy God, that thou wouldest not suffer the revengers of blood to destroy any more, lest they destroy my son." And he said, "As the Lord liveth, thou shalt not one hair of thy son fall to the earth." So finally, David is taken in with this. He's rushed. He's allowed the emotions of this exploitation to take place. And finally, he gives in to her and says, "Okay, well, here's what we'll do. Nobody will touch a hair on your son's head." Then the woman said, "Let thine handmaiden, I pray thee, speak one word unto my lord the king." And he said, "Say on." And the woman said, "Wherefore then hast thou thought such a thing against the people of God? For the king doth speak this thing as one which is faulty, in that the king doth not fetch home again his banished." So the trap and snare being laid, now they turn the tables on David. And she says, "Okay, well, you would deal with this supposed made-up story," now she's telling him, "but why won't you fetch home your heir? Why won't you fetch home your son and forgive him?" Well, Absalom is not the only heir, okay? And Absalom is guilty because Absalom has all kinds of witnesses that saw him with premeditation murder his son. And so this is where facts have got to override. Truth has got to override the emotions and the feelings. Verse 14, "For we must needs die, and are as water spilt on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Neither doth God respect any person, yet doth he devise means that his banishment be not expelled from him. Now therefore that I am come to speak of this thing unto the Lord my king, it is because the people have made me afraid. And thine handmaiden said, I will now speak unto the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his handmaiden, for the king will hear to deliver his handmaiden out of the hand of the man that would destroy me and my son together out of the inheritance of God. Now, I've got to stop there. I'm looking at my time, and I hate to saw it off right here, but basically, she's now turning the tables. We'll get into more of this next time. And she's saying, if you would help this made-up handmaiden, why wouldn't you help your son? Oh, be careful when you're in the midst of problems. Problems always are steeped in emotions. Problems always are demanding an answer right away. And the best thing you'll ever do with problems are let the emotions settle down. And if you have that opportunity, give it plenty of time to make a wise and godly choice. Easier said than done. But with God's help, you can do that. Hey, thank you for joining us. We'll see you again next time.